Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Dean, and welcome to the Friday morning Materials Exchange Smart Market call on the digital place for the LBM industry. As you all know, we do this call every Friday morning. We've got a theme of thought leadership and innovation in our space, and we meet every Friday at 10 o'clock. We talk about materials exchange system resources, tips, and tricks. We do market updates on the mill and supply side, and we have awesome industry guests. And this week we're going to have Brendan Lowry from Forestry Economic Advisors as our guest speaker, and he'll be talking with Mike later on in the program. Just as a reminder, we've had some new developments here this week as we've now introduced Zoom training as a regular basis into our offering. We meet every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern. And we cover everything in terms of new system setup, orientations, building out your watch lists, how to conduct transactions, bids and counters, how the post transactions work in terms of transaction flow, and then digital reporting. So that's available. You can just kind of set your clocks to 10 minutes to 2 every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and we'll be doing training each week. Again, we talk about the smart market and materials exchange as a thought leadership company and entity. We always talk on this call about new companies, new products, new people entering the space, and probably most importantly, new processes that we're introducing with the exchange platform and the new processes that are going on, throughout the industry. If you recall, over the last 2 weeks, we've talked about new products. We've introduced dry dug fir, hem fir, fir and larch. We've introduced and talked about our premium, our MX premium specification that we're using to categorize high-end lumber that's being offered. As you remember, you can see all of this stuff on our match platform. You'll notice down at the bottom, the new AK KD Radius Edge decking. You'll see that our product categories are growing significantly, and we're always making decisions about what's the best kind of products that can be listed on the platform and be traded in a high volume commodity kind of way. And so as we start to build out our platform moving forward, we'll be recategorizing these, making these maybe a little bit easier to navigate through. But certainly that is a great problem and a good challenge to have. Remind you just to log in and out daily to see system updates, and your watch list will stay in place. And then, of course, your pricing is refreshed each and every night. One more new product that we added last week was Osb Radiant Barrier. And again, you'll find that on the panel exchange. Just a reminder that we've got 3 different exchanges: a lumber exchange, a panel exchange, and our stud exchange. So we also talked last week about new companies entering the space. So Materials Exchange, we appeal to all sorts of different buying kinds of customers, whether they be dealers or component manufacturers. Last week, we introduced some new turnkey framers that were entering the marketplace, distributors, construction suppliers, industrial manufacturers. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about new roles and how people are pursuing new ways of using the exchange. These same buyers can also become sellers on the platform. Last week, we talked about Dynamic Construction, a turnkey framer that is entering the Materials Exchange work space. And Chris is the president of the National Framers Council, which is part of the SBCA. And the component manufacturers are taking a very high interest in our exchange and how we go about conducting business. So just this week, we introduced a bunch of new companies that came on the platform. Again, some of the component guys that I just talked about, including Industrial Wood Products, Roundhouse Framing. We've got CPM Construction on the platform now. We've got some new distributors that have come on board: Encore Building Products and JMAT Building Supply out of New Jersey. And again, flipping to the other side of the coin, you'll notice that JMAT Supply is also on as a seller. And we're going to talk a little bit about new roles in the industry and how LBM dealers like Cleveland Lumber Company or Lenco Supply also are taking on the role of selling products. So the dynamics of the roles in the industry are changing with the capability of new transparent pricing. Here's just a screenshot from JMAT Supply. There's Encore Building Products. I wanted to show you the nuts and bolts of new transactions that are now starting to hit the exchange. So you'll see here, this is kind of a billboard, and this is our behind the scenes view of what happens on the exchange every day. We've got time counters and date counters and price counters. We can show you everything in real time of when different pricing changes on the exchange and what kinds of bids and asks and offers are being made. Here's an example of a new user, brand new user that listed some OSB on the exchange at 2:57 in the afternoon. He threw 13.50 on there. A few minutes later, he dropped the price down to 13.47 and let it sit, and really didn't get any hits on that. And you'll see at 5:30 in the afternoon, when the exchange expired, that bid essentially expired at 13.47. So there's an example. He threw out a price, dropped the price a little bit in real time, didn't get a hit on it, the bid expired. That's fine. Here's another example where that same supplier, and again, he's brand new to our exchange, bought and sold some product. He started by adding some OSB on the platform at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at $1,100. A few minutes later, he dropped it $5. At that point, a buyer became interested and threw an offer on the table of $11.25. At this point, the seller dropped his price by a couple of dollars, and the buyer upped his price by a couple of dollars, and a transaction occurred. And all that occurred in the course of about 40 minutes of just back and forth trading that was on the system. Now you'll see the different prices here, of course, realizing that the buyer bought it at $11.42, the seller sold it at $10.93. We've got freight included in that transaction. And as you will always remember, as a buyer, you're seeing your landed cost on the transaction. On the sell side, you are seeing your selling price out of your mill, and the freight is what we maintain in the background. The freight is a huge component of the value proposition of what we offer, and that's just a good example there where each buyer and seller is seeing their landed cost or their landed distribution price, and we stay in the middle and manage that. But this was a good example of a new seller selling to someone that he had never sold to before. And that's a first-time transaction for both companies doing business with each other. So again, this is a brand new seller on the platform. Has only been on the platform a week. He was now hooked up with a brand new buyer in Ohio that purchased his product. They don't even know each other. They've never even done business before. And we're seeing this happen all the time. I just watched Todd jump on the call here. Good morning, Todd. Todd and I were talking when he first came on the platform about the value of bidding multifamily jobs out of markets and how you have to deal with not knowing freight rates to out of market areas, not knowing distribution in out of market areas, and how valuable the platform is and being that intermediary and being able to hook you up with distribution in a certain area, products and suppliers in a certain area, and freight rates that you're not even familiar with. And when you're dealing with these out-of-market multifamily locations, you can have 10 locations on your watch list that you're buying for, and all of that is freight adjusted. That is a huge component to the exchange these days, and a new offering allowing you to think differently. So here's another example. Cleveland Lumber Company is one of our established MX buyers. They're also a member of LBM Advantage. I've known Vince Valentino a long time, Cleveland Lumber. Avi Selva is on the line. Avi, are you there? Can you say hi? I think he's just got to unmute himself. There he is. Hi, Avi. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah.
I just wanted to allude to the fact Avi has been watching these presentations now for a while, and last week he asked us, he raised his hand and said, what do I got to do to become a seller on the platform, and how does that work? So we set him up, and just so you know, all we need from you to become a seller on the platform is a different email address. All of our logins are email specific. So just by providing a second email address and then loading your what we call OD pairs, origin destination pairs. Remember, we're managing the freight. We're matching every single seller with every single buyer on the platform and maintaining those freights. That's a massive undertaking behind the scenes. That value is huge. So Avi raised his hand and said, I'd like to sell on the platform. So Avi, you sold some product on the platform this week. I'm really most interested in your mindset and what cued you up to say, I'd like to give this a try.
So we had some excess OSB that we bought in November and December. And as you've mentioned, Paul, on previous calls, don't fall in love with your material. It has to serve its need and it has to serve a purpose. And so we decided as a company that we had enough to give up and just to move. And we'd rather lock in our profit now rather than risk diminishing profit later. So we took advantage of the platform and were able to fulfill a need for somebody else and help us out as well.
That's wonderful, and thank you for that. It's also, you'll see the header I've got on here of innovation and thought leadership. I mean, it's that kind of thinking by someone. Avi is someone that has come into the business, into the family business, but from outside of the industry, from a finance background, and he's got a totally different way of thinking in terms of how to use the exchange in the ways that he's used to using an exchange, and now applying it to the lumber distribution channels. And so, Avi, that's a tremendous win for you and for us in terms of proving out the model. And we appreciate your support very much.
If I could just chime in about that transaction, it was a true win-win, because while Avi was able to right-size his inventory, there was a buy side to that right-size their inventory too. They were in need. So the exchange did exactly what it's supposed to do, and that is to balance out supply and demand across the geographic region. And I think it's important to look at both sides of the equation. While Avi benefited greatly, the buyer on that also benefited greatly. This is just a perfect example of using a connected network of people to help each other out and to really make the industry better.
Very good. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who typically does his mill update at this point. And Ashley, I know you were privy to some other sort of transactions like the one we just described, where you've got people coming on board, not only as buyers, but also as sellers. Anything else you'd want to comment on that before you get going on your market update?
For sure, Paul. Avi, go Ramblers, and Sister Jean. Good game this weekend, man. We hope they represent Chicago well. So I have a little follow-up to that, to the OSB transactions. Jory, who runs our social media, sent me a little note yesterday, and she's always on top of things, talking to all different people in the market. So I could sit here and talk about the transactions we did, which are wonderful. Love talking about that, but let's talk about the transactions that we can do. Jory forwarded me a social media post from somebody looking for OSB in Florida. I contacted that person and I said, hey, we have OSB on the platform. Why don't you buy it on here? Now think about this. They're looking for OSB for a customer. We have it. They don't want to use our platform because they're fighting it. To me, that's crazy. But hey, if they want to do that, that's fine with me. Maybe somebody in one of their groups told them not to use us. Maybe they don't like technology. But to me, if I'm going to serve a customer's need, I'm going to find it anywhere. So that was one of the interesting ways in the transaction. I'll jump into the market thing, but I want to leave more time for Brendan, because coming from Coke, I love listening to people like Brendan, because one thing I can't stand is listening to social media posts where everybody says, you got to buy because the price is going up, but they never back it up with any actual facts. And hey, the market may be going up, maybe going down. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that, but I do know when I'm armed with facts, I can make better decisions and I can live with my decisions, not just bloviating online. So quick thing on the market, in a digital market, we've had a lot more posts this week, a lot more people selling. We've had more bids, more active bids, which I look at as a KPI, a key performance indicator, as really good use, right? We're trying to change habits here of what what people do. And if anybody remembers Peter Cetera's song, it's a hard habit to break. We are having a hard time breaking habits, but it is changing, which is good, right? So real quick, digital markets. My niece has been looking for a record for 2 months, has visited all the record stores in Chicago, can't find it. Her uncle, Ashley, found it online from Rob for Love 2, somewhere out in the middle of Newark, New Jersey. I went to all the record stores, couldn't find it, found one for $200, but I went on the digital marketplaces around the United States and I found one for $54 delivered. I'm the cool uncle now because I found that. So think about this. There are a lot of Rob for Loves 2 out there in the lumber industry that have something that you want or have something that you need. So what I'm challenging everybody here is to drop these old habits that you have of saying that you only buy what people sell you the lowest price at. That's just not true. Go find and reach out and find new people. Reach out in the digital network and find new people. So the quick market update is, I'm going to listen to Brendan and I'm going to listen to what he has to say because I'm not sure where the market is going. It's a 50-50 mixed message right now. Half the people think it's going up, half the people think it's going down. So back to you, Paul.
All right, I appreciate that very much, Ash. And with that, I'm excited to introduce this morning Brendan Lowry from Forestry Economic Advisors. Mike, I'm going to let you take over from here.
So I wish I could tell you in my words how excited I am to have Brendan talk with us. Unequivocally, Brendan is known as, if not the best, one of the best macroeconomic economists in the world. His view of the marketplace of forestry products is vast, both vertically as far as products go and geography with across the globe. Listen in, ask questions. This is a true treat. Normally, this would cost a lot of money if you were going to do this privately. So with that, I actually want to introduce Brendan and let him explain and real quick what Forest Economic Advisors does and how you might be able to utilize them. So good morning, Brendan.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, my name is Brendan Lowney, and I'm one of the founders of Forest Economic Advisors. We started in 2009. We spun out of another company, and my partner Paul and I have been doing this since about the early 94, 95 timeframe. So what we do is we provide forecast and analysis for stakeholders throughout the industry. So we do this via our publications. We have monthly and quarterly publications, our databases, and we also do extensive contract research where we work with clients to address specific issues. And we do multi-client studies where we address topical issues. So a great example of a recent multi-client studies is where we did a deep dive on the European beetle issue and what effect that European wood is going to have on global markets and North American markets. We are an owner-operated company. We have 14 analysts focused solely on wood products and timber on this space. So that's what we do. We run events as well, and we're really passionate about this space. So.
Excellent. Hey, Paul, if you could do us a favor, just stop sharing your screen so we can get a little better view of each other.
There you go. Sure.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. So, Brendan, you said you do events, and I've been to your events. They're fantastic. You just had the Global Log and Lumber Conference. Normally, it would be in Vancouver. It was virtual, of course, this year. 700 people, I think you said, attended.
Right. A little over, yeah.
That's really amazing for a virtual event. What was your big takeaway from what you heard there?
Okay, so that event is, as you said, it's our global focus. So we get speakers from all around the world. And some of the main takeaways are, the main takeaway was that, it's a very optimistic future from a demand and pricing standpoint, and that North America is really where the action is going to be. We're in the early stages of what we think will be a sustained housing boom. And, the question becomes, where are we going to get the fiber to build these homes and to supply this lumber that we need? So that was some of the main themes. And then there were themes involving, how's China, how is their market going to evolve, and who's going to serve that market, particularly with some of the political issues that they've had with Australia and some other issues that they've had with Russia, which no longer wants to import logs into China. So we purchased Wood Markets Group back about 4 years ago to really get a better understanding of global events. So before that, we were primarily focused on North America. And now because these markets are a lot more complex, we've really cast our eye overseas as well, so we can better understand our own market.
Okay. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there's a bit of a supply shortage. Demand's outrunning supply in North America. We can make the assumption that there's not enough production in North America to meet the supply, so it's got to come from somewhere else, right?
Right.
We're seeing a big importation of European wood, but that wood is a global source. It can go anywhere. What do you see happening, and what could be some of the black swan event or other influences that might change the flow of that European wood to the States?
Okay. Yeah, there's a few issues. So eventually, a lot of the supply chain bottlenecks we're seeing in this industry, they're really replicated across many others. And one of the things that's happened is all the companies adjusted their planning for a low demand period, and then they get overloaded with very high demand. So that's one of the issues. And then another background issue is that British Columbia has lost about half of its standing inventory of lodgepole pine due to a beetle epidemic. So there has been a migration towards the U.S. South, which is where the fiber is. So that process is ongoing. There've been COVID restrictions. There've been trouble getting labor for the mills. So some of these things are going to clear up, and we're going to be able to produce more wood in the U.S. and in North America. But as you point out, Europe has a lot of wood to send. They had a wind event that knocked down a lot of wood. They're having a pine beetle infestation, and that wood is going to be available to ship, and they're looking to come into this market. And what's going to be required is not just high prices, but sustained high prices to get that operation up and running. And one of the big markets for Europe that people don't know about is the Middle East and North Africa. Those are trusted customers for them. So this has to be a really high premium for them to kind of shift their focus from those traditional markets into North America.
So let's jump back to Southern Yellow Pine. We know that production's growing. Western Canada is shrinking. What do you see as some of the challenges for, we know the challenges, or how to get over the challenges of product adoption in the marketplace? So you've got a dealer who, I only buy, Western spruce. Well, there's a restriction on that, right?
Right.
Now, what do you see the Europeans doing to overcome that, or the Southern Yellow Pine people doing to overcome that perception in the market?
Some of these things take a while. I mean, a good example would be plywood and OSB, right? So New England, where I live, was the last holdout. Switching OSB had a bad reputation, as a structural panel. Everyone was still using plywood, but those price differentials and the economics become so overwhelming. And then people start looking at other areas of North America saying, well, they're using OSB and it's actually great. So some of this is just a time and perception thing. And of course, pricing helps. So.
No doubt. Just shift gears real quick back to Europe. All right, so they like to go to North Africa. We know they're liking to come to the States right now because of the prices. What would have to happen in China to get them to not want to come to the States and go over there? From like a macro
I
picture.
mean, well, I mean, if you think of the end uses for North America, wood, we build homes with wood. In China, the main end uses are industrial or the things like concrete forming, molding, doors, that sort of thing. So they're generally looking, they don't have, their quality requirements just typically aren't as high. They don't have the same structural applications by and large. So the US is going to be a more profitable market. And those Western European link style mills are very flexible. They can easily shift their production to North American standards. And that's not true of some of the other major players in the world. Russia, for instance, is a good example of that.
Right. So, we just heard about, okay, Russia's not going to send any logs to China, but we talked a little bit earlier. You question whether they have the capability to make the product that we're going to take here in North America.
I mean, over time, they can develop that, but I mean, there aren't that many. My understanding from talking to my colleagues is there aren't that many kilns in Russia. So, they're sending green lumber out, and it's not a tremendous demand in North America for green pine. So that's going to be a challenge. So.
Got it. If I'm going to sit here and monitor the Chinese situation, what would a headline look like? I'm just thinking, the government decides they're going to put in 10 million new housing starts in the next 2 years. Is that a legit number to kind of take a look at? Because I know the scale over there is quite a bit bigger than what we would consider large for housing starts. What would be a number someone could watch for?
Well, I mean, they're trying to shift their economy, their model away from investment, residential and business investment, towards a consumer-led model. Their ratio of consumption to GDP has really plunged over the past 10 to 15 years. But it's kind of like that quote, "Give me chastity, just not yet." And it's like, give me a change in business, in growth model, just not yet. So you just have to look at where the lumber is flowing, and keep in mind what it looks like. I mean, when you buy a house in China, it's usually a concrete empty box. You have to put furring strips on the walls and then apply like wallboard to it. And the main uses of China are going to be concrete, as I say, concrete forming, furniture, doors, windows, moldings, that sort of thing. So it's really, you can't picture a housing start the same way in China as you would in the US. You're not building, with wood, stick frame construction, by and large. Very, very, very rare there. So.
Okay, excellent. So let's flip back to North America. You said at the beginning you see a long sustained housing market here.
Right.
What would be a bullish scenario, bearish scenario that you could envision, just kind of keep an eye out for, that would change that forecast? Like, how could we get more housing starts? How could we get less housing starts?
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I just would love to clear up. There's a perception out there that we're getting a COVID boost. What else are you going to spend your money on? There's all sorts of stimulus money coming in, and to some extent that's true. But we were right on the cusp of a strong increase in housing right before COVID hit. So for December of 19 and January, February of 20. We averaged almost 1.6 million housing starts. And the reason for that, there's three reasons why we think this is a sustained boom. Number one, we haven't built enough houses. So we underbuilt relative to population growth and demand for 12 years. We're underbuilt to the tune of 3 to 4 million units. Number two, our housing stock is extremely old. So if I go back to the mid 90s, the median age of an owner-occupied house in the US was about 27 years old. Flash forward to 2019, this data comes out every other year. It's now 42 years old. So we don't have enough houses.
Hang on,
we
wait.
have an old housing stock, and we have a bulge of people coming in.
Go back to that number again. That was really interesting. So 19, what year? 19, what? The housing
2019, the median age of an owner-occupied house is 42 years old. So
40
that
people.
supports new construction and R&R spendings. And those are your two big drivers of lumber. New construction.
What year was it? What year was it that it was 27 years?
90, mid 90s, 93 to 95, one of those years.
So the average age has gone up 15 years in approximately a 25-year time horizon.
Right.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's
So
going to continue to rise because we haven't built many homes in the last 10 years. So that's, yeah. So this,
that's an interesting stat.
yeah. So you combine that with the fact that we haven't built enough homes, it should support, R&R will come off more than new construction. The R&R boom is partially a sugar high from the effects of COVID and the lockdowns and all that, but it's still going to be sustained because we don't have enough homes, and you know, our housing stock is old, so people are going to have to put additions on, expansions, that sort of thing.
What kind of rise in interest rates do you think it would take to damper the situation?
Yeah,
Or-
that's a great question. So they've risen a bit. They were at like 2.8. Now I think they were like 3.17 yesterday or something. If we look at that period I was talking about, that 3 months right before COVID, mortgage rates averaged 3.6%. So I think that's a pretty good benchmark. Once we get over 3.6 up into 3.7, it could start to have a material effect on demand. So that's, you know, one of the things we've seen is typically you want to follow that 10-year bond, and the spread between the bond and the mortgage rates was acting really wacky for most of the pandemic, but it's kind of returned to a more typical level. So that relationship will still hold. So then the question is, you know, is the bond, what's the Fed going to allow bond yields to do? And I don't think they're going to want them to go too much, say over 2. So if bond yields are at 2, that's going to give you a mortgage rate about 3.7, 3.8. Then you get into the range where it could be worrisome. But you know, that I didn't even mention, you know, between the old houses and the fact that we don't have enough, we have a bulge of folks coming into their 30s right now. So all these factors really support strong housing. So if we just looked at underlying demand based on traditional relationships, we should be building 1.7 to 1.8 million housing starts. So there's your bullish scenarios. You know, first off, we have to be able to supply that, and it's not just building materials, but right now so many things are in short supply, appliances, there's all sorts of things, electronics, that sort. So the downside scenario is not all that much different than we've experienced for most of the last, say, 5 years prior to the pandemic, which is really hard to imagine with these demographics that we don't build more homes in this country.
So there's been a bunch of talk in the news. NAHB's out saying, you know, oh, something has to be done about these lumber prices. It's really affecting us. Can you shed a little bit of light? Like what, legitimately, what do you think prices would have to get to actually put a dent in it?
Well, right now, the thing that's going to dent activity and housing starts isn't so much the price, it's the supply. I mean, we've seen that people on allocation, you can't, even though the price is extremely high and these mills are making money hand over fist, you know, they just can't supply the lumber. So I would think the NHB, I understand why they do what they do. They're a member-driven organization. Most of their members are the smaller builders. And these guys, look at their margin just gets hammered when lumber prices go up. And that's what they focus on. But the true cost of a house is your land and your labor. I mean, those are huge, and those don't change. So the effect of lower mortgage rates is more than offset the effect of increased lumber prices in terms of affordability over the last year or so. And we've seen, but that's not to say that, a 20 to, 20,000 increase in lumber and panel costs, that's going to leave a mark on a, say, a $320,000 house.
But it's really just kicking the can down the road because the demographics are there. These houses are going to get built.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we're worried way more about supply than demand, and not for building materials, but also for the builder community, right? We don't have the workers, the skilled workers that are required, the framers and some of the contractors to supply 1.7 or 1.8 million starts using traditional methods. I saw, if you look at how manufacturing productivity has changed over the last 50 years, it's incredible. You had people with rivets, 50 years ago, and now you've got robots doing it. And really the only major innovation that we've seen on home building is the nail gun. It's not even comparable. So a McKinsey study showed that between 1995 and 2015, residential construction productivity declined by 20%. And we talked to the folks at the innovation committee on the NAHB, and they said that's a BS study. It's actually been flat. It's like, okay, well, manufacturing productivity was up 40% over that time frame. So even if we go by their numbers, that flat productivity growth is not. I mean, that's the thing that's keeping home prices up. That's it. It's labor, not using labor efficiently enough, and we don't have a supply. If you look at the demographics of Mexico, irrespective of what the politics of it are, if we open the border tomorrow, we're not going to get these skilled tradesmen from Mexico coming up. They had a baby boom and then a bust. These folks don't exist, and some of the other immigrant groups that we have coming in don't have that culture and building culture and expertise that the Mexican immigrants had. So that's not a solution. So the solution is to try to move some of the stuff off site and do this stuff more efficiently.
I do want to segment over there. If we could wrap up this kind of supply demand conversation real quick. What I'm hearing is demand's going to be great. We need the houses, like they have to get built. Canada really doesn't have the resource right now or the production capability to meet that demand. The US South definitely has the resource. Do you see the production coming on strong enough there? It's obviously growing. Do you think
it's
that's
just
enough?
a time thing. Yeah, I mean, ultimately the producer's going to go where the fiber is. It's all about the fiber, right? And so, but it takes a while. It takes a while. A lot of Canadian firms have migrated to the South, right? That's why they're not as passionate about some of these the trade issues between the U.S. and Canada, because they've hedged it by buying up operations in the South, but they're having trouble getting the labor force in place and getting that production up. It will happen. It's just taking a while.
What about Eastern Canada? Do you see production increase there?
Yeah, a little bit, but they have limits on their annual allowable cuts based on environmental laws and so forth, and their system of allocating lumber cutting rights. So yes, everywhere. I mean, when prices are where they are, people are going to eventually do what they can do to cash in.
Right. So I think what I'm hearing then, of course, this is going to leave a bit of a gap in the supply that will get filled in from Europe or from Brazil or something, somewhere with a panel from Brazil.
Right.
Would it be fair to say that the floor price, the low end price of lumber has fundamentally been risen or is risen?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the floor is the cost, and the costs you can run below cost for a while if you want. Peak firms do that. Oftentimes, if they want to run someone out of business, or if they want to keep people employed and they think costs are going to go up. Having said that, I would say that we're not going to go near cost for quite a while based on this discussion. So the downside seems to be that these firms, not that they won't make money, it's that they'll make less money.
What do you see is the price in the US that is a no-go for the Europeans coming over?
Yeah, Paul's done a lot of work. My colleague Paul Yankee, who's our main lumber analyst. I'm going to defer that to him, but it's a lot lower than where prices are now. Let's just say that, a lot lower.
So we,
It's there has to be a perception that they're going to be sustained to reorient the focus towards North America. And I think that perception is emerging, if it's not already there.
okay.
Hey, Mike, I wonder if this might be a good time. We've got a lot of questions from the audience. I don't know. Can you see those, Mike? There's a bunch of supply questions.
That in the chat box there?
Brendan, I don't know if you can. So, do you have production numbers for North America? Is it growing? Is it year over year growing? Is there anything you can shed the light on that?
So we provide all this. We have it when we can provide it with people. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. My main analytical role here is housing, but Paul and some of our other Crystal, we have all this information.
Sure, we can probably follow up with Paul Yankee another time too, and I appreciate that.
Well, Crystal Govan, she's very good. She writes our LMST, a lumber market status and trends.
Do you guys also track wood in the pipeline? I mean, raw materials and wood coming through the pipeline.
Oh yeah, so we're economists. Everything's supply and demand, right? So it starts on the demand side with what I'm saying about housing and other end uses. But on the supply side, we have our main timber analyst is Rocky Goodnow, and he looks, right from the stump on. So he factors in all these things.
I had Rick Russell just replied that a mill in South Dakota announced that they were getting 80% of their lumber from U.S. Forest Service land, and that they were closing. They just couldn't get material. And again, I guess we sort of beat that horse to death a little bit. You've shed light on that is an issue.
Right.
And then Avi asks a question about boomers on not selling their homes to provide an opportunity for growing families as their second home. It's just so funny. I just sold my house this week, and to your credit, to your statistic, it's exactly 42 years old.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of fascinating. But that's going to a younger, growing family that's now coming up through, if you would.
Right.
And so, anyway, that was an interesting. Yeah. Any comments on that?
Yes. People tend to move out of their main house at an older age than most people think. We're really looking at mid to late 70s when people typically make that decision, not younger. And the problem a lot of these folks are having, or even people who are younger and want to move out, is they don't have a place to move to. Mm-hmm. I've talked to several people personally who say, I'd love to move. We have an older employee who works for us, and he's trying to sell his house. He's got a big house in Atlanta. It's too big for him. He's an empty nester. He's like, I have nowhere to go. And that's an issue. That's a very big issue.
All right, let's shift. I like to finish up these conversations with this question, and we already talked about it, so I know where you're going to go. But it's the question: what do you see that other people don't see that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? That's going to fundamentally change the industry, and what our users right now, or the people on this call, would benefit from knowing.
Okay, I'll give two. One's quick and the other's a little more detailed. One is that European wood that they're looking at, the beetle damaged wood, that's going to last longer and it's going to be economically viable for longer than the Europeans currently think, based on the experience we saw up in British Columbia. So this isn't just a 1 or 2 year phenomenon. They're going to have excess wood that they're going to look to offload for several more years. The other thing is CLT, which we haven't really talked about. So that's cross-laminated timbers. You make huge wood panels out of lumber, get a press, you smash it together, and it's a really good competitor for steel, but mostly for concrete. And we're starting to see CLT take off in popularity, and it's going to allow wood to make inroads into urban construction and multifamily construction, where it's been not a major player relative to steel and concrete. So as the CLT industry evolves, CLT is cross-laminated timber. It also stands for consumes a lot of timber. That's going to put pressure on supply of lumber for the near term, if this industry starts to advance like we think it probably will. And then the thing that people aren't thinking about that is that CLT facilitates a more efficient way and green way of building a building. But it's very resource inefficient. So it's worth doing because you get so many savings from a labor standpoint. But over time, we would see that CLT product, these mass panel products, evolving in a similar way that the OSB market evolved. So you'd more likely see mass OSB panels supplanting CLT panels. 80% of all these panels are buried anyway. You don't care about the aesthetics. And to the extent that you do, you can just put a veneer on the outside. It will look just as good. So that's something people aren't thinking about when they get really excited about CLT, or if they get really anxious about the supply situation due to the impending increase in CLT production.
Is there, we know CLT standing for cross-laminated timber. Is there a phrase or a word for super thick OSB laminated on both sides?
Yeah, mass OSB panels. There's, Swiss Chrono in Europe is making it. There's mass plywood, MPP. There's, mass OSB panels. So
now, we talked about this a little bit. The optimal number of floors for a CLT building is above 6 floors, correct? Is that how
certainly over 4 to 6 is kind of that's 4 to 7. That's kind of that sweet spot. And so a lot of these buildings are going to be hybrid. Actually, you'll see, maybe a concrete or steel platform, and then you build, 4 or 6 stories on top of that made out of CLT or wood.
Okay, and then let's go back to the 4-story, the
Right.
traditional 4-story multifamily student housing building. What do you see changes happening there?
These new construction techniques that are required to build more with a smaller labor force, CLT that's a sexy choice, gets a lot of attention, but modular is huge too. So modular is, you just stack these boxes. So if we look at what Marriott and Hilton are doing, they're building hotels with just stacking wooden boxes, and then they put a sheathing on the outside. You can't even tell it's made out of wood. And what it costs about the same as a traditionally built hotel, but they build it in half the time. It frees up money for the developer, so they love it. So things that can be replicated, classrooms, laboratories, that sort of thing, is really going to be really a sweet spot for this sort of construction.
Right.
And we actually, I'm glad I just thought of this. Entekra is doing offsite construction, right?
Right.
He's a big, very vocal in the market. And one of the things he's vocal about is the quality of the product. Can you just chime in a little bit about why that's so important?
Right. So Entekra is, they're doing some multifamily, but their sweet spot has been single family. So this offsite construction isn't confined to just, urban construction on multis. It's you build it in a factory and then you can assemble it really quickly. But what happens in effect is your customers are no longer people, they're robots, right? So and robots are much less forgiving of, warp, wane, crook, that sort of thing. So these folks need a higher quality material, and people like Jerry are very strident about it. Very strident about it. So what we're going to see is people are going to be willing to pay more for this, and you could start to see some engineered wood products supplanting dimensional lumber, like an LSL type product, because it's much more consistent, supplanting lumber. And even though it's more expensive, you can offset that as a builder by much lower labor costs.
Yeah, it's what's interesting about this entire conversation that we're talking about is you're talking about change in our industry, and our industry hasn't changed in 50 years.
Right.
It seems like this change is going to happen much more rapidly than people anticipate.
Yeah, part of it is because, to be fair, if you think a lot of the folks on this call, their customers' business hasn't changed much, which explains partially why theirs hasn't, I think, as much, right? The way we build houses. So, I mean, it could be a very challenging environment down the road if you have folks going, if you have kind of a manufacturing model for housing and they can go direct to the producers. So that's something that for like the wholesale community to think about, you know, some of the challenges. Initially, we're not building enough homes. So this new way of construction is really replacing homes that wouldn't have otherwise been built, right? But over time, longer term, I think that's going to be a challenge for the wholesale community.
Right, it's going to be that subtle shift. It's no big deal now that they build a bunch of homes offsite because, like you said, they wouldn't have been built without offsite. But then once things slow down a little bit, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, all of a sudden that has become the most efficient way to build a house,
Right.
and they're not stick framing it as much.
Yeah, and well, and the consumer perceptions change, right? Right now, if I say, hey, I'm going to move into a prefab house, you'll turn your nose up. I've been to factories with some of these houses. The quality is not as good. It's higher, extremely high quality in some of these prefab houses. I mean, Unity Homes up in New Hampshire is a great example, and they use a lot of wood, which is, I mean, great for this industry. But they use more wood. But
a correlation to that is, you know, Uber. I remember when Jory and I took our first Uber, we were freaked out that we were getting in some stranger's car.
right.
You fast forward to today, I would rather get in an Uber because that car I know is part of a system that's been rated. It's going to be better than a taxi. Like the taxis in Chicago are disgusting. I would much rather get in someone's personal car because I know it's going to be nicer. And it just took time, right? It took 5 or 6 years and that perception changed. So I'm a big believer in offsite construction. I've witnessed it firsthand. My family has a house that was built offsite, and 20 years later, you would never be able to tell that it was offsite house, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we appreciate that. We're getting close to the hour here. And Mike, if you want to, any closing thoughts on this?
My closing thought is the resources at FEA are vast and valuable. If you can tap into them directly by engaging with them, or if you can get to one of their conferences, I couldn't recommend it enough. They can do and provide you with more data than you could get yourself studying for a month straight. So thank you, Brendan. We really appreciate it. Here's the shameless plug to Materials Exchange. Brendan, why do you want us to be successful? What will our success help you with?
I think it just will give us better data to analyze and better insights into the industry. You know, and we get, I mean, that's the main, we will be able to track in kind of more of a real time basis what prices are doing, but what products are selling, what you know, how the industry is evolving over time. So it will just really allow us to do our jobs better, we think.
And that's something I can't highlight enough is a digital market, a network of connected people creating good, reliable, accurate, and instant data is better for the entire industry. So the shameless plug for us is that, look, if you question whether or not you should use us because we're a little different and maybe you're going to lose some advantage, consider the advantages that you will gain through just the data alone. And I think what you will find is the efficiency of the digital market is going to be very attractive long-term for you. So with that, let's close. It was a great hour. Brendan, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on the call. Once again, any questions, reach out to Paul or anyone on our team. And Brendan's website is getfea.com. Getfea.com.
Well, if you just Google Forest Economic Advisors, you'll see us.
Great. So thanks a lot, everyone. This was phenomenal. I appreciate it. One little nugget of gold to leave you with. We internally have made a decision to have an in-person event in May. Details will follow. It's going to be around 100 people here in Chicago. And we are going to bring in speakers from outside the lumber industry to give us valuable insight on how their supply chains work. So more details to follow, but probably May 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere around there. Paul, back to you. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Well, again, thank you very much. Any comments or suggestions, feel free just to send them along to me. We share them with the users on the call, and we share them internally. So thank you for that. It's been a great week. And thank you again, Brendan. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
All right, take care.
Hey, Brendan, hang on if you would.